Welcome to the Operator Overload Podcast, the show where we take a deep dive into the world of computing. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For more information about the show, please visit jimlawless.net/overload. Hi all. Today we're going to talk about the ancient media control interface in Windows and how I used it to play MP3 files with a simple little command line program. In around 2009, I was experimenting with some Windows APIs because I wanted some way to play MP3 files from the command line without running Windows Media Player or without running, some sort of a hefty package or anything like that. I figured that Windows had to have some way to play MP3 files. What I found was a subsystem called the Media Control Interface. Now, I will preface this with a warning that Microsoft really wants to deprecate the Media Control Interface, so I have no idea how long this subsystem is going to work. That said, let's move forward. I toyed with the Media Control Interface, and what I found was something that was what I thought was somewhat, very un-Windows-like. You see, when I would work on Windows code, I was used to having to bring in various data structures and, fill in various members for different types of things. And the interface to the Media Control Interface, I figured there would be some sort of a data structure in Windows.h, or more correctly, WinMM.h, that I would have to instantiate a variable and fill in a bunch of fields and that sort of thing. And it turned out that was really not what I ended up doing. The Media Control Interface actually has a command interpreter that you send your API calls to it in the form of command strings. So my initial project was a simple little C program that pipes standard input out to this MCI command interface. So in order to do this, there were a couple things I had to do. One of them was I had to make sure that in the linkage for the C compiler that I was using, in this case, the GNU C compiler for Windows, I had to make sure that we would link in the WinMM library so that the bindings for the Windows Multimedia DLL were going to be built into the executable. It doesn't look like I had to bring in WinMM.h or anything like that. I thought I did originally, but it doesn't look like I do. So what I did was I built a function that would dispatch a command string to the Media Control Interface. There's just an exposed API call called MCI send string. It takes the command. I couldn't tell you what these other parameters are. Basically, like a lot of Windows ones, you just send nulls or zeros as the default. You can certainly look those up if you want. So I built this little toy. I decided that I would probably not be typing all of this in by hand as I played with the different command patterns. And you can take a look at Microsoft's site for the Media Control Interface and the different types of commands it has, because there's a number of different types of commands and options that you can use to play various media. I wanted to focus on MP3 files. I thought I would just get a line about as big as a path plus 64 characters, give or take, from the standard input device. So just from the console device. That way I could pipe in a text file of commands. I wanted to be able to put comments in my commands. So I do this a lot. Even when I have configuration files, if I'm parsing them, I put in something to check for the first character to see if it's the pound symbol. If it is, I just continue in the input loop. In this case, I wanted a way to terminate the script without having to build in a command of my own other than just an exclamation point as the first character. if there was a non-zero value in that buffer that we just got from the fgets call, I wanted to chop off the new line at the end of it. And this is the code I normally use to do that. This might be one of those sharp corners where people will say, this is horrible, turn to Rust right now. But this is something I've done for quite a while. Your mileage may vary. If we're still blank in that case, if a blank line has been entered, so it would have just been a new line character that got flattened out to a hard zero here. If there's nothing here, we just continue the loop. So we can tolerate blank lines as well. If somehow the input line has made it past all of those defenses, we send it to the MCI interface and see what happens. Okay, so now we have this little script interpreter, and we can use it to play with the multimedia interface. So let's try that. Okay, I have some canned scripts I've made here. And here's the first one. This particular one, just play an MP3 from the file system. So I have an MP3 file here called scale.mp3 that I generated that just plays a major scale, only one octave. And we issue our commands from the script file. It ignores anything with a pound sign in front. So the very first thing I learned to do was to issue a close all. That tells the multimedia subsystem to just close everything that's within your power to close it within this process. It's entirely possible that other processes may be able to have things running. It just depends. But I wanted to close everything at the start, make sure we start with a clean slate. So close is actually a verb that's understood by the MCI command interface. Then this is the command to actually open and prep an MP3 file for playing. It's open, file name. I have to specify the type, and the type used for any file starting with MP is MPEG video, even though we know this is going to be MPEG audio. This alias is what we will use. This is basically like a variable. So this the MP3 is something we've got. It's going to be kind of like a variable we use. Okay, so that is one command that'll go to the script interpreter. And I should warn you all too, there are some versions of Windows that don't play nicely with MP3 files directly. So by the time you get to this command in the MCI script, if you get some errors, there are some ways around it, and it's really beyond the scope of this video. Shoot me an email if you need to work around that, and I can tell you how to do it, or I can tell you how to try anyway. Okay, so we're going to open this, and this MP3, the MP3 is going to be our variable. The next line we send to the command processor to execute is called play. And so we're going to play some type of media. What we're going to do is we're going to play the media represented by that MP3 symbol, the alias, and the suffix wait tells the MCI interpreter to block at that point until the media file is complete, until the playing is complete. And there's some other options you have there. You can return immediately, and you can issue commands to the media control interface to check the status of whatever media is playing. I think you can actually loop the media file so that when it gets to the end, it just starts over again. I wanted to just play what was specified, wait for it to finish, and then come back to my program. So this hopefully then plays the MP3 file. Then I issue a close to close specifically the alias, the MP3 file that we've opened. And I put an exclamation point here. Again, the pound sign and the exclamation points are mine. They're not part of the MCI script interpreter. They're part of that series of ifs just before I cleanse the data before I send it to the MCI script interpreter. So we're all done. Doesn't matter what we put after this exclamation point. As soon as my code sees the exclamation point, it's all done. So let's try to play this. Okay. So you should have heard a set of scales at that point, just not a set of scales, just a single scale. And I displayed every line that I was sending to the MCI's command interpreter. So now the thing I thought was very interesting about this was I think the command interpreter pattern is much more natural than having to fill out a bunch of data structures and making sure that you have things in the right order, and that you have all of these manifest constants set. And a lot of times there are defaults that you need to plug in. With a command interpreter, you don't really need all that. You can depend on the command interpreter to hide all of that complexity for you. So that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. Okay, something that I ran into very early on when I started using this was the Windows blessing and curse of having spaces in file names. Because if you'll note that, see, spaces are delimiters here between parameters to these various MCI commands, like a lot of command interpreters. So how do we deal with that? Well, my initial way of dealing with it was to make an API call to use short file names for the files that I wanted to specify. And what happened over time was I found that there are installations of Windows that don't have to support that reduced file name set. I think you guys have seen them where the file names are all scrunched together with tildes, and I think you don't get more than an 8 character dot 3 character name, no matter what it is. It's just it was just the wrong approach. It worked for a little while, but it was really the wrong approach. So what I did was I experimented a bit, and I found that you can enclose at least the file name. You might be able to enclose all of these options if you want to in double quotes, and it treats that as a string. So if I'd had a space somewhere in here in the scale.mp3, I could have enclosed the whole thing in quotes. This one plays just as good as the prior script. Okay, so now we have a way to, I think, probably a best practice while I'm building my command line MP3 player would be to just enclose every file name that the user could put in double quotes, and then I'd be safe. Okay, so the output of this experimentation with the MM script, that was really just for me to toy with this. And by the way, if for some reason you want to play with this and you can't manage to compile one of the binaries for this, or a binary for this rather, let me know and I'll see what I can do to try to put a binary copy out there for you, of the executable. I host the executable for the Command MP3 and Command MP3 Win players on my GitHub presence, but I don't include this multimedia toy. It's probably not something that a lot of people would want to do. And I'm assuming that you guys would be able to do this in C anyway. And by the way, we're going to get into a little bit of Python here toward the end of the show. And you can do this same sort of thing in Python if you like, for Windows, that is. Okay. So after my experiments, I needed to actually then build my command line MP3 player. And by the way, this is all MIT licensed. We can talk a little bit about that a little later, but it's a pretty permissive license. So I just wanted everybody to be able to. I didn't build this so that it was a product that I intended to really support, but it was something where I wanted to share. And if people found it useful, then great. So there's a lot of the code that I borrowed from the MM script C program. I put in some uh, vanity messages at the top so you'd know where to go to ask questions or things like that. Um, the command line interface is basically a path to an MP3 file. And it gets to be something I found out was it also works with URLs. We'll get to that in a bit. Okay. So the very first thing I do is if you don't have the right arguments, it tries to tell you what they should be, and then exits with a return code of one. Otherwise, it issues that first send command close all. Remember in those scripts, that was the first thing I did was close anything that's been started by this process. Okay. Then I built in my command buffer, I used sprintf to build a command buffer with the first argument sent to the program in the open verb surrounded by double quotes. So if I would have said scale.mp3, this would have said open double quote scale.mp3 double quote space type blah, 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 all of that stuff. I send it to the command buffer. It's a slightly different version of the send command. I only output the command that has been sent to it when there's an error. Gosh, I need to I need to I need to indent a little better. Okay, so after it sends the command that was built here based on the command line, then we play it. We play the MP3 wait, and then we return zero. I probably should close that MP3 in here, and I'll probably have to add that at a later time. So I should probably have a close MP3. So some of you will probably want to make sure that I add that. I'll have to update that out on GitHub. I don't think this causes any problems because once you drop out, you're done. And because we do a close all at the start, I think everything is covered. Okay. So this is my command line MP3 player. And let's see how well it. Okay. Very nice. The problem is that people were, well, this didn't start out as a problem. What I perceived might be a problem is that people would be using this to spawn the cmdmp3.exe, which right now weighs in at about 42,000 bytes. Because it's very small, they were packaging it with, I know some people have been packaging it with other systems, and it's just very small and a convenient way to play MP3s, which are smaller than WAV files generally on Windows. So the issue is that when you run cmdmp3 from some sort of a GUI application, a console window pops up unless you take special care to run the console window in a hidden window, basically. So people were ultimately, or they could spawn this and a console window comes up, and sometimes that is a little jarring for the end user. They see something that is reminiscent of MS-DOS and they close the window or do something like that. So I made an alternative version of this that's packaged with it called cmdmp3 Win. That is the pure Windows version of the same program. You'll see that it has a lot of the same portions of the code that its console mode sibling does. It has the send, it plays. The difference is that when there's a message to be had in, excuse me, send command, uh, we issue it with a message box because there's no console window for me to send this information out. The other thing was I had some issues parsing the command line. There used to be some constants, underscore, underscore, argc, underscore, underscore, argv that were remnants from Microsoft compilers that the GNU C compiler supported for a while. I think you can still link with them, but they don't always actually bind correctly. They don't actually parse correctly. So I had to parse my own command line args. And I did so by using our handy string toke function. And I believe I've got it so that it supports double quotes and everything appropriately. So I just get the entire command line and I look for the file name. And basically, this is the same program. It's just that it it doesn't have a console window when it runs. So if you're going to run if you want to run cmdmp3 from a GUI app, you should probably run cmdmp3 win. That will bring a Windows program to life. It will live just long enough to play the MP3. And because I don't go into a big Windows message loop here after we send it, I just return and we exit. The Windows process terminates and it's gone. It's not just hanging out there or anything like that. Okay, so I package both of those up in um, in my GitHub repo in the and in the zip distribution for the executable. I put both of these sources in there because they're pretty small. I also provide a compile batch file just called build.bat. The script line isn't in there. I added that just for this podcast. But basically, I wanted to make sure, and I have these lines in the comments as well. I just wanted to be sure that this was dead simple for people to use if they had to build it on their own for a Windows system so that we didn't have to get into a bunch of complicated linking and make files and things of that nature. So the entirety of each program is a single C program that this alone GCC command will compile and link either GCC win or I'm sorry, either cmdmp3 or cmdmp3 win, and it should produce both of those. Now, if you go out to my GitHub repository, a number of people have forked this source code. A number of them have broken these down into they've broken the send down to a canned function that they can just link in. They've separated that from the main logic of the program, and they have a formal make file for this. That's all fine. I just wanted to be sure that I had a way for someone who probably is only installing the C compiler to compile these. I wanted to be sure that they could do just that. Okay. Now the interesting thing here was that um, by now we've been talking about calling this DLL from a simple C program. You can call this from any program that can make API calls to the Windows Multimedia DLL. So I did it with a Python Windows program a few years ago. Yeah, this is out of date. I don't have the domain gmail.us anymore. I'll have to update that, but it's still an MIT license. You're welcome to, even if you didn't use the MIT license, this is so dead simple that if you were to write this from scratch, you'd probably write essentially the same program. It's just not a big deal. So what the core of the program here is that I create an object called WinDMM. I'm sorry, WinMM that has the Windows Multimedia DLL. I create a function called MCI send. It's very similar to the send that we had in our C program. We send a string to it. Remember, we passed in null 00. These are the Python equivalents of that. If the return value isn't 0, we display the error and the string that came in, just like in the other program. We create a function here, though, called play MP3. And this is something like what one of the other folks who had forked my code has done. They've separated the MP3 play function into a function of its own instead of just a few lines of code. So it issues a close all, an open with double quotes around the file name, just like we've done before. It will then play the MP3. Remember, we had an alias. Then it will close the MP3 properly, which I need to do in the C program if I get a chance to update it. And really, that's all the further that you need to go. You could actually twist this into something because you've got the MCI send string. It might be faster for a lot of you to just cobble together a Python program or to ask ChatGPT to build you a Python program to work like the cmdmp3.c file if you're not big on C. So we can do this in anything, like I said, that can call the Windows Multimedia DLL. Um, I think I've seen some PowerShell scripts that do this and some C# programs that do it. It's basically just about anything can reach out and play these if if the Windows Multimedia subsystem is configured in such a way that it allows you to play MP3s. When you play these, you'll note that the multimedia player, Windows Multimedia Player, didn't pop up at any time. They just played the MP3, which was what I was after. As far as adoption, I know of a few places. If I go out and Google cmdmp3, uh, there's a number of different folks using it. Some folks have emailed me and thanked me and said, that they didn't want to package WAV files with their code or whatever. So I've had some good reviews. I saw because I can Google for this. I saw that a person had built this into some sort of a what I can only understand is was a game system of some kind, but they changed my C program to take my by Jim Lawless out of it, calling it spam, which I thought was well, initially I thought it was insulting. This really isn't spam. I just want people to know where they can go back to get a hold of more information if they only end up with the binary, which happens sometimes. But it's all under MIT license. The person was perfectly at liberty to remove it from the output of the executable, just not the source code, which is fine. And as far as I know, they didn't, but I'll never know. It's neither here nor there. But one of the one of the better places that I think you'll find this is actually, and let me type out the URL for you here. I'm going to put this in the show notes for the episode, but in the repository for node.js packages, there's a package called play-sound that basically I'll let you play sound with a node.js application. And the way that it does that is it spawns out a multimedia player, a command line multimedia player of some sort. There are a number of these on a number of different platforms. Mine isn't the only one. And that's what this package is configured for. But cmdmp3 is one of the options in this package for Windows. So, I thought that was pretty good. I also found a very early review of this when I put it out on the web, and the reviewer said that it could not play MP3 files. Um, I'm sorry. He said it could. He said it could not play WAV files. He was reviewing command line audio players for Windows, and there were a few. But he said basically CMD MP3 couldn't play WAV files. Well, I hate to tell the reviewer this, but it's in the name. I mean, do one thing well. The Unix philosophy. It's a command line MP3 player. Not only can it not play MP3 files, it can't compress files, it can't change your wallpaper, it can't reboot the system. It's intended to play MP3s. So I thought that was an odd review. But somehow later, Microsoft, because I'm using a command interpreter interface to the insides of their media control interface, they added WAV file support at no extra cost. And I really didn't have to do anything. So I have a version of the scale.wave here. Sorry, WAV file version of scale.mp3, scale.wave. For some time, cmdmp3 now has been able to play WAV files. I didn't have to do anything for this. It's one of the times Microsoft changed things in my favor, and I wasn't quite sure how to react. Another thing that they did in my favor was, as I alluded to earlier, they changed the multimedia player, and maybe it had been like that for a while, that you could place a URL as that file name, and it could play MP3s from any file. So I think that sort of lends itself, I think that lends credence to the versatility of the command interface for that API. And this is no surprise to people who have worked with the Unix TCP protocols, the formal app protocols like SMTP or FTP or things like that, where it's really a bunch of text commands that kind of govern how things go versus a bunch of data structures that turn a little brittle over time. But I was impressed by this. The only thing that I had to do for my sources when I re-released was effectively change the documentation and change those opening help scripts so that if they didn't, or those help messages, so if they didn't specify a parameter the first time the user ran this, they would get a message that says, well, this needs to be a file name or a URL here, that sort of thing. I didn't have to change the guts of the code to make any of this work. And so where does this go in the future? I don't really have future plans for this. Uh, the only upkeep that I've had is to really just adapt to what Microsoft is changing to that MCI interface. Now, again, at some point, I suspect Microsoft will end that, and this cmdmp3 I'll either have to rewrite it to use Media Player, which I am not quite certain that I want to do, or I will end up using a library to do it, which I've done in Rust already as an experiment. There's a library that I've used in Rust to do something similar, and it works on multiple platforms. So it's entirely possible I would gravitate toward something like that. I just don't change a lot with this code. It's endured for about 16 years now. There's been a few problems with it, depending on some Windows installation, but overall, I think it has been a pretty popular program, and I'm happy to have written it. If you have any questions, please shoot them to me in the email address that's coming up in the link here. And I thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Let's do this again soon. Take care.